Hello everyone, it's Barbara Parker and welcome to 2020 Bolingbrook. Today we're going to learn all about bees.
With me today is Marge Trocchi, and she's a beekeeper, and she's going to tell us all about what you need to do to become a beekeeper. Marge, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself when we start off.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a beekeeper. I live in the neighborhood. I've been keeping bees for about 12 years. But a little bit of my background, people always ask me, what got you into beekeeping? My job was a naturalist, so I love the outdoors. I always did a lot of things outdoors. I recently retired from that job. But as I worked that job, I became a beekeeper, and I was able to incorporate a lot of my interest in bees at my job for a while, and actually had bees at my job. So I did that. I love hiking and being outdoors and nature, so beekeeping just was a natural fit for me and as a little hobby. And it did get a little out of hand.
And they usually do, especially when you love it.
Yeah, I do.
Now, when you say out of hand, was that out of hand at home doing it or out of hand with your job?
No, it was mostly, on the personal side of it at home. I started beekeeping just with, the thought I like honey. I'll try maybe having one hive, which is what I did for the first year. And I took a class, and I did what I had to do and started one hive. And then I loved it so much that I built a couple more hives for the next year. And I think it was about maybe 3 or maybe 4 years at most later, I had 36 hives.
Wow.
So when I say got out of hand, in a nice way, I love doing it. But when I see people take up beekeeping, if they have the fever or not, if they dismiss it after a year or two, or if they go on, there's something about it, and I can talk about, the reasons why it's not all about the honey, although that is a nice perk. And it does a lot of work to an extent. When you have 36 hives, it's a lot of work. But a couple hives it's really nice, and it's just a nice, relaxing, get you outdoors. I want to say hobby, but it's also, a commitment. So.
Oh, that's good. Now, I also know that you tend the hives for the Hidden Oaks.
Yes.
For the Park District?
Yes. Yeah. That's I think maybe 8 or 9 years, but it's been a while that I've been doing that, and I happened to run into a beekeeper who was moving, and he actually had hives there. So the hives were already established when I took over that yard, and then it's a real good relationship with the Park District. So, they're my hives and my honey, but I sell the honey to them, and they sell it at their nature center. So it's, like I said, a nice relationship. They have a nice bee yard, built there for me, with an enclosure, and the public gets to view the bees. And actually, they have a walkway going right up to the bees, which is really nice. When I'm out there, people always stop by, and they always have nice things to say and are always curious about bees. So, it's a real nice relationship that we have.
Oh, that's good. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the questions I was asked when I mentioned to somebody that I was going to have a beekeeper on, they wanted to know what's involved with starting your own.
Okay, well, it depends on, usually the questions I get like that are from someone who wants to maybe have their backyard bees, and not a big full out, I want to do commercial beekeeping, but they want just a couple hives of their own. And that is very doable. I always tell people it's not like chickens or horses where you have to be there every day for them. The bees, their forage is outside, so you don't have to go feed them every day. But it is a commitment, and there are things that you have to do. So I would say, first off, if you're interested in keeping bees, it's check with your village, and obviously it's okay in Bolingbrook, but there are certain villages, the ordinances differ from village to village. So I always say, check with your village first, and then, if it's fine, check with your neighbors. It's not mandatory that you do, but I've taught a lot of beekeeping classes, and I always tell people that's the first thing I did after I made sure it was okay with the village. I checked with my neighbors, because even if it's okay with the village, if you have neighbors that don't like bees, or they're really allergic to stings or something, then certainly you don't want irate neighbors. But for the most part, honeybees are not a threat. They're not defensive. They're defensive, but they're not aggressive. And if you learn a little bit more about them, they're really not a threat at all. But if your neighbor is not sure about that, you want to make sure that they're okay. So after you go through those hoops, then what do you have to do? You have to. I would say, first off, before you even get bees, you need to know about bees, because bees are livestock. They're not, you're caring for livestock, even though you think it's just a little insect. But they work as a colony. So when I say I had 36 hives, I consider that like 36 units, almost like 36 animals. And there's things you need to know to care for them, because if you don't, then you're doing them an injustice. So learn about the bees, and there are many books out there. It's a really popular subject now. So there's so many resources out there for beekeepers now. There's, like I said, our local libraries are a ton of information, because they've really gotten some good resources there. Most importantly, I'd say join or frequent a local bee club. There's a lot of them out there. And this way you'll get to talk to people who either keep bees or are interested in bees, and you'll get to know. And you'll need that support group as you go along, because it's just a fun thing. And so there are classes too. Check the Bee Association websites. There are local classes. You don't have to take a class. Most villages probably, won't, but actually some do require you to. But I would suggest it's very beneficial to take a class. I know people who haven't, but do your research. However you do it, do your research, because you want to know what you're doing. And then you'll need to, get your equipment, and which is a hive. It's pretty simple equipment. Once you get the basic structure, if you're going to start 1 or 2 hives, which is what I suggest. If you're going to start beekeeping, you can start with 1 like I did, but I always suggest, 2 is better than 1, just because you have something to compare to. And then the other equipment you need is pretty much a jacket or a suit, a bee suit, a set of gloves, a little smoker. There's not a lot of things you need to beekeep, except for the hive and the bees, which it can get a little pricey, but once you get that established, you're on your way.
Well, when you get that, now, do the bees come there? Like, you'll put something in there that gravitates the bees toward it, or do you go to a store and buy your bee livestock?
That's a great question. And actually, most likely you'll just buy the bees.
Okay.
I don't want to rule out, will the bees come? It's very unlikely, but I have had people who, have had a hive sitting out there and the bees came, but it's so not guaranteed.
Okay.
So when people start bees, they buy a box of bees. Now, there's places, and usually the bee clubs will direct you to where you can buy bees. But You buy a box of bees, usually about 3 pounds of bees. It's about 10,000 bees, and it comes with one queen in a little cage inside of the container with all the other bees. So that's what you get. So you have to have your unit, your hive, all set, and you pretty much dump the bees in, and the queen. Now you keep the queen separate for a few days, a week, depending on a few things. But she didn't come from the same hive as the box of bees, so they need to get used to her pheromones before they'll accept her.
So is there, like in the hive, is there a little spot that the queen goes in, or is there another structure type thing that she sits close by?
Well, once you release her from her little cage, she's free to roam.
Okay.
So a hive, you've probably seen the white boxes out there, or they don't have to be white, they can be any color. But inside those boxes are these frames. And the bees need to, when you get a brand new hive, there's no wax in there. The bees have to build the comb themselves out of the wax that they actually create in their abdomen. So they have to build out all this wax, and then that wax is where the comb, or honeycomb you want to call it, that's where they're going to bring nectar in and make honey and keep it in there and bring pollen in and store pollen, and that's where the queen's going to lay her eggs. So everything happens on that comb inside the hive, and the queen will have free roam of the hive, and she'll lay eggs, and then those 10,000 bees may get up to 60,000 bees, in a couple months.
And they could all fit in that one structure then, at that many? Okay.
Oh, yeah. And if you go to the park district and you see my hives, sometimes they'll be only 2 boxes high, and sometimes they'll be 6 boxes high. And that's something you'd see more of the boxes this time of year when they're bringing in honey. And I'll be harvesting. I harvested some already, but this is the time that the bees are foraging and they're bringing in honey. Come winter, you'll just see the 2 boxes, because I take all those, I call them honey supers, the boxes where they're bringing in extra honey for me to harvest. Those all come off before winter, and then I just leave these 2 brood boxes, which is where the queen resides and the colony.
Okay, so now you're down to your 2 boxes again, and the winter's setting in. What do you need to do to make sure that they stay safe during the winter?
Right. So, that's a challenging time for the bees, because a lot of people are surprised to hear that, they do live through the winter. You don't, have to take them inside, or they don't, most insects like, bumblebees and hornets and different things, they all die except for the queen, and they'll, for the winter. But honeybees, they're a social insect, so they need the whole colony to survive. They can't survive just one bee. They need the colony. So, so they do survive the winter. Well, that's the goal. And what they do is they cluster. They don't hibernate. They don't go to sleep. They're awake. They just cluster around the queen. They keep her warm, and they take their turns, kind of like the penguins do, and rotate around the queen, and this cluster in the hive, and they'll eat their supplies of honey that they've packed away for the winter. A regular size hive needs about 60 to 90 pounds of honey for the winter. So when I'm out there harvesting honey, I make sure that I leave enough for them, that they need a lot of honey to get through the winter. So as a beekeeper, that's some of the things that you're doing. You're monitoring the size of their hive and their food resources and so forth. So that's, like I said, that's a challenge for the bees to get through. And it's not so much the cold. That they can survive a lot of cold, but they have to have enough food, and you have to be careful not to, they create so much heat in there that they could, if there's no ventilation, the condensation could actually kill
That's
them.
what I was going to ask you, if you needed to cover them, but obviously then you don't, because
Well-
they're creating a lot of heat, so they need some place for that heat also to escape a little bit with fresh air coming in.
That is so important. But it doesn't have to be a lot. They have a little entrance on the bottom. You just have to make sure they have a little entrance on the top and at the bottom so they can have a way for the air to circulate. Now, when you mentioned covering the bees, and you talk to other beekeepers, and some do. I don't, as a rule, cover my bees. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't, because I have so many hives that it's just too much. But I do maybe put some insulation on top, as the heat rises. There's a few things you can do, but mainly you got to make sure they have that ventilation. And you see how cold it gets in the winters here.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the bees I had last year survived. Now you're always going to have some losses here or there, and it is challenging. Now I'll throw this in because beekeeping is rewarding. And it's fun, but it's not the same kind of beekeeping there 30 or 40 years ago. Maybe you talk to one of the old timers and they put the hive out there and they just went and got the honey a certain time of year, and that's all. They didn't have to tend to it. They do have issues like pests and diseases that we have to deal with, and that have come over from there's this little mite that is probably the main cause of their mortality is this mite. And so there's these pests that they have to deal with now. You can still, keep bees and do it successfully, but just like anything else, gardening or, chickens or anything, you need to be knowledgeable about, the things that you need to be aware of and to deal with those along the way. So that's, part of beekeeping.
Now, when you went from your 1 or 2 to your 36 now, did you buy bees each time you added them, or do you separate some of the bees and put them in another hive then and get going?
Well, over the years, I've gone up and down in numbers, depending on, and I don't have them all in my backyard. I'll just say that. I only have a few in my backyard, but I have, bees in Bolingbrook. I have bees in other places. So, and I mean, that's a great question. Sometimes when I have 50 hives right now. So when I increased, this is what I did when I retired. I thought, I'll just get some more bees. And so I did buy some more bees. But this past year, what I did to increase some of the my colonies is I was able to split them. So there's a lot of different things you can do. You can never buy bees. If you start with one colony, you're very successful. You can keep it alive from year to year. You can split the hives and get maybe buy another queen, but split all the bees. If they're doing really well, you can do these, we call it splits, and you can create more colonies out of the original. So, and there's a little bit of an art to doing that, and keeping your bees healthy and able to do that and not have to buy bees. That's every beekeeper's.
Now, okay, the bees will have babies and grow. How do you know then if you have a queen bee or a not queen bee?
So when I go into a hive, that's mainly what I'm always, I want to say looking for. I'm not always looking for the queen, but you want to be sure that you have a queen. A hive without a queen is destined to die because there's no queen replacing. The bees don't live, as a rule, they live 5 or 6 weeks, all the bees, except for the queen. So she's constantly laying eggs and replenishing them throughout the season, spring and summer. The winter she doesn't lay, but for the most part. See, there's always exceptions. But so you have to make sure that there's a queen in there, because if a hive without a queen, will die. So how do you know? I don't look for the queen per se, but I look for evidence of the queen. If I see there's eggs and larvae, or kept brood, which is the end stage before they hatch into adults, then I'm good with that. I know there's a queen, that she's in there laying. You know, if I go into a hive and I don't see eggs, but I see like the older, you know, the pupa where, you know, that means there was a queen in there a couple weeks ago, but I don't see any eggs, so then something might have happened to her. So that's just, you know, one of the things that you're monitoring besides their health and, you know, and their space. You know, you don't start out with 2 boxes of bees. When you get that box of bees, you only put them in 1 box. You monitor it. When they build that out and they get bigger, then you need to put another box on.
So when you recommended that people have 2 hives, that means you should order 2 boxes of bees?
Yeah, if you
so
decide
that
to
you
go
could...
that route, yeah, you need to have 2 hives and 2, you know, 2 boxes of bees if you start them. Now, when I say, I'll throw this in there because when I say a hive, you know, you can, they're selling hives. We used to only be able to go to like the bee companies. There's, you know, some throughout the United States and order our hives. And now it's so popular, you can pick them up, you know, I think at Costco, Farm and Fleet, places like that. The thing is when you see a starter kit, and it's, you know, it's a good deal, and it is probably a good deal, but when it says starter kit, realize that you're going to need more pretty soon. Because you may get your bees and put them in the starter kit of 1 box, but they're going to grow out of that real soon. You're going to need to put another box on. And then if you want honey, then you need to put another box on and another box. So when I tell somebody to, or when I direct people when they're starting beekeeping, I'll say, you know, start with, you know, 2 of those big brood boxes and then 2 of the honey. We call them honey supers, but they're a little bit smaller boxes, and 2 of those. So I kind of recommend like a 4-box hive to start with.
Okay. Now, when you extract the honey, what does that entail?
You just put a spigot on the hive and you turn it and the honey comes out? No. I'm just kidding. So first off, a hive will, you know, people always ask me this, you know, how much honey can you get from a hive? You can get no honey or you can get 200 pounds a year. You know, it just depends. I would say on average, you may get maybe 50 pounds a year, maybe 30 to 50 pounds per hive. Now that's just an average. And when I go into a yard, usually I'll have a couple hives that are, you know, I'm getting a few boxes from, and then some hives that maybe I only got 1 box of honey. So, and some none. You know, there's factors, and it gets complicated. I can tell you why, but so on average, you may get, you know, maybe 30 to 50 pounds per hive. But what does it entail? You got to go get those. When I say boxes of honey, I mentioned those frames that are in those boxes, and the bees build that comb out. So when I say the boxes, the honey supers or the honey boxes on top, I use something that keeps the queen down below because I don't want her going up laying eggs in the other boxes. So these boxes on top, they're only going to be for honey because the queen can't get up there. So what the bees do is they draw out the honeycomb and they're bringing in nectar. And when they bring the nectar in, there's a lot of water in nectar. They need to bring that water level down. So they play with the honey and fan it and get it real thick, but they also put some enzymes in there from some glands that they have, and they throw in some good stuff. So it's not just sugar. It's actually a really healthy product. And so once they do that, and it's low enough, the water level's low enough for it to be honey, they cover that with wax. And so as a beekeeper, when I look in there and I see that they're covered with wax, then I know I can harvest it. You know, if you harvest it when it's nectar, then that's not good. So it has to be honey. So so what I need to do is, when I decide I'm going to go in and you know, take off the honey, I have to get rid of the bees that are in those boxes. And there's so many different ways. You can just take the frame out and brush off the bees and, you know, collect them that way. You can some beekeepers have kind of a blower where they'll set the box there and they'll kind of just blow the bees gently out. What I do is I spray a cloth with, it's a natural product. It smells really good. It smells like almonds actually, but the bees don't like it. So if I just put that over there, they dry themselves down and then I can, So you have to get the bees off. And then I bring it back. I just happen to have my own kitchen that I use for harvesting honey. I have a whole floor dedicated to it. And you need to cut the wax off. So I have a tub where I hold, it's called an uncapping tub, and I use a hot knife. It's an electric knife, so that when I go over it, that top layer of wax, it just slices off real easily, opens up those cells. And then once I do that, then I put it into an extractor, and it's just a big centrifuge. And this one has a motor on. I used to do this for years and years.
So you progressed.
And I progressed, yeah. And so, you put it in an extractor and spin the honey out. And then I just put it right into buckets. I run it through a strainer once just to catch any wax bits and things. And pretty much, I don't do anything else to it. Put it in the bottles and it's ready to...
Now, when you put them in the bottles, it's kind of like canning with other things you're doing. Is it similar to the process that you use with getting them in
Yeah,
there?
I'm not too familiar with canning, except I know that you have to boil bottles and all that. You don't have to. I mean, the bottles are cleaned, but you don't have to. And all I have to do is put them in the cleaned bottles.
And then twist them
Yeah.
tight?
Honey is antimicrobial, antifungal, everything. It's people use it on wounds and everything. There's like no bacteria can grow in there. It's so safe. But yeah, I have cleaned bottles and just put it in there and cap it up. And honey lasts forever. So it's a nice product. You don't have to worry about it spoiling. But it doesn't last forever in my house because it goes. People buy honey. It sells itself.
And you probably use it a lot yourself anyway,
A
right?
lot.
Yeah. With that. All right. Have you ever gotten stung by one of your bees?
It's not the first time I've had that question. Yes, and it's not so much because they're aggressive. Like I said, honeybees are pretty calm. They will defend the colony. So obviously, when I bring people into my bee yard, I'll just be calm, don't swat. And so I wear a jacket. When I first started, I had the full suit. I just wear a jacket and with a veil. I don't wear gloves often because that's how gentle they are. They crawl all over me. I just make sure when I'm pulling stuff out of the hive, I just do it slowly and the bees get out of my way. And they'll crawl all over me. And see, once you get past that, it's fine. But yes, I've been stung because when you have tens of thousands of bees, especially in the height of the season, there's so many bees when you open up a hive that many times I'll accidentally put my hand on them and they don't like that and they will sting if I do that. And then there's some times of the year where there's a dearth, like where there's not, we're going to probably go into it maybe in August-ish, where there's not a lot of forage out there, so they have honey in the hive, but they're kind of on high alert because so many other insects want to get into that hive to steal their honey. So they're on high alert, and sometimes when they're on high alert, they have their different jobs, so the guard bees will be on high alert, and sometimes they'll go at you, but for the most
Well, I
part,
was wondering if you got stung when you were taking their honey when you go in there, because if they're being protective.
usually, no, but that's one time I'll wear gloves, and it's not so much because I'm worried about stinging, but it's because I don't like to get sticky. So I will, but yeah, I do wear the gloves usually when I'm, just going there and I'm pulling honey, and it's, I'll do it for, a couple hours, and it's a lot of work, and you're, so again, I have gotten stung, but supposedly bee venom is really good for you. So I always think I'm getting my dose of medicine, and
When I was young, I'm from New York, and my aunt owned a Carvel ice cream place, but upstate. And we went up to visit them, and we were back behind the Carvel, and they had a stream, and we were throwing rocks and playing and everything. Well, my brother threw a rock that knocked a beehive down,
Oh, no.
and they were huge bees. And the only person that got stung was my cousin. And he had to go to the emergency room that night. He swelled up like you wouldn't believe. Found out he's allergic to bees.
Well, do you know if they were honeybees or?
I don't think they were
Because
honeybees.
was it, when you said it knocked the hive, was it hanging from a tree?
It was hanging from a tree.
Okay, those weren't bees. Those weren't honeybees. You know,
No,
those-
and because these were big.
Yeah, they were probably, well, and this is good for our viewers to know, because I always get this questions or requests. You know, there's honeybees. I have a hive of honeybees. Would you like them? And I say, are they hanging from your tree, or are they in a big gray papery ball? And they're like, yes.
Yeah,
I'm like,
see.
those are bald-faced hornets. And thank you, but I don't want those. Yeah, so honeybees, you know, there's so many other insects out there, paper wasps and other things that a lot of people mistake for bees. And I deal with honeybees, and I will go catch swarms. Now, I don't know, you know, swarming is a big thing with honeybees because that's their natural way of you know, proliferating. Their hive is doing so well, and it's so congested that they're going to decide half of them are going to leave with the queen, and they're going to raise another queen. And so that's another thing that, you know, they naturally want to do this, but as a beekeeper, you wanted to try to prevent that because you don't want to lose your bees. But sometimes you lose them anyway, and not lose them, but sometimes they'll swarm, and it may land on a nearby tree, and you're able to retrieve it and then just start another hive.
Well, how do you retrieve it then?
So when bees swarm, they'll leave with the original queen, and they'll plan this. This is how smart bees are. They've already got this plan in motion weeks before. And so they're already starting to raise another queen in the hive, knowing that, you know, half the bees are going to leave. So when they leave with the queen, they usually go to a nearby, I want to say tree. That's the typical place they'll go, but they may go on a deck, you know, a structure or somewhere nearby. And it could be high, it could be low. But what they're doing is they leave, and then the scout bees go out, and they look for a good permanent home. And it could take them minutes, it could take them hours, it could take them days. So until they decide, these scout bees decide on a permanent home, the ball of bees will hang on the tree or wherever they decided to hang out. And like I said, many cases it's a nearby tree, and if it's low enough, then, you know, I can easily retrieve that. If it's hanging, especially if it's hanging on a branch, the queen's in the middle, and really all you have to do there is just like shake them down into another hive or a box. What I usually do during swarm season, which is usually May, June, I'll just keep a big Rubbermaid bin in my car, because I get a lot of calls from people who say, I have a swarm of bees, would you want to come get it? And if I can manage to reach it and get it, I will, because I have extra hives I can hive them in, and it's free bees. So the bees they're not a threat when they've swarmed, because they gorge themselves with honey before they leave, because they know they're going to need to make wax, and wherever their home they find, they're going to need, you know, and food and so forth. So they gorge themselves with honey, and they're so laid back because they're so full, and you know, there's the chance of stinging you is almost no. So,
It's kind of like their version of Thanksgiving dinner then?
yeah, exactly. So, you know, and people are always amazed, especially if they're watching. They're like, how could you do that? I don't even wear gloves for that, because, you know, there's just no threat. And you just get them. Now, sometimes they go way too high, that it's out of my hands. And but at least they're replenishing themselves. I always look at it.
I was wondering too, do you keep a blank hive ready? And would they go there then in one close by as opposed to going to a tree?
I've done that in the past. I've never had them decide to go in there.
Ah.
But with that said, there are swarm traps, and I've tried those out before. But there's a little bit of a science to it. Swarm traps, you try to mimic where they would normally go. So high. So if you have this certain size box and put it so high where swarms typically go, you can actually bait it. There's, I think it's lemongrass or something that, you put in there. It kind of draws the bees. And it works well for a lot of beekeepers. And some do leave the extra hive out. I usually don't. And I wait for my swarm calls, or if I see swarms that are taking place. I know because I'm not always by my hives every day. There's probably some swarm and I don't even know it. Or I'll know it when I go into the hive and see there's half of them are gone. But it's just one of the chances you take. But you try to prevent that, and you do the best you can. But it happens sometimes.
All right, here's a silly question. I know you have a lot of bees and everything. Do you ever name your queen bees?
No, I haven't. But I did give that task to my granddaughter this past summer. And I said, I'm going to have 50 queens. And she goes, I will. She was her idea. I'll name them all. And she never got back to me with all the names. I'm still waiting. It's just beekeeping to me is I can't describe it except to say that once you do it and it's like my way of relaxing to be around all these bees flying around you. It's hard to explain, but there's just something fascinating about the bees. And like I said, we're talking about bees. I've given many talks to all different age groups. It doesn't matter if they're this big or seniors. Everyone's interested in the honeybees. And when you start hearing all the, how fascinating they are and how smart they are and, the things that they do. I've been doing this for 13 years, and every year I learn something new about bees. So.
Well, because you love them, and it shows. Listening to you now, yes. When you love what you do, I think you exude that to other people so that maybe they get the little infection from you a bit.
Right, and that's like I said, I've taught many beekeeping courses, and I tell people it's a commitment. So make sure that you're ready for that. And then there's things like I mentioned, some of the pests that you have to deal with. That's not the fun part of beekeeping, but there's so many things that outweigh that, and it's just the pleasure of keeping bees, and then throw in some honey, and then when you do a lot of harvesting, then you end up with wax. So I make candles, I make products, there's just so many things. It's like the opportunities are endless. With a couple hives, you can do so many things.
Wow. We didn't even touch on making candles from the wax from there.
Yeah.
You have your own little business going on.
I do.
Like two.
When I started beekeeping, one day it dawned on me, and I said, "Oh, I have a business," So.
Well, you do, because you're selling them. You got to buy all the supplies and everything to do that, and then.
Yeah, and like I said, the beauty of it is I know people who want bees because they just love that. They know that they're pollinating, they're doing something for the environment, and they love to just watch them in their garden. And you don't even have to harvest honey. It's not like you have to. So, there's people who just like the bees, and there's people who want to, just have a couple hives, and you can, like I said, you can make a few candles, you can have some honey. It's so nice to just have, there's always honey on my dining room table. And it's like, oh, I got a birthday today. Oh, everybody in my family gets honey or a honey product. But they love it. And it's just so nice to have that on hand all the time. Um, so, and it gets me outside. Like I said, I really love to be outdoors. And it's something that...
And that you have to travel to your various hives around,
yes.
so you're out more than...
Yeah. And
And she
my
has a
mask-
bee mask on. Look at how lovely that is.
Being a beekeeper, it just kind of fits in with what's going on now, so I'm alone. I don't have to, hasn't stopped me. I haven't skipped a beat with the beekeeping because I've been able to get out there and do what I have to do and so forth.
Oh, well, that's great. I have one last question.
Sure.
Do you taste the difference with the honey that you harvest yourself as opposed to going into the grocery store and buying a jar?
Well, yes. Now, the grocery store honey is, I can't really vouch for exactly what it is. Obviously, there's so many brands, and there's probably some good honeys out there, but there's also some honeys that may not even be pure honey out there. And there's a lot of, mislabeled things and so forth. I just say that just because, being a beekeeper, we hear about all the honey coming from other countries and what they're doing and all the misguided labels and so forth. So knowing your local beekeeper and like I'll show people the hives. I'll show them the process if they want. But knowing where your honey comes from is important. And of course, many people come to me for honey because they hear local honey is supposed to be good for you. Doctors are sending people to their local beekeepers. Actually, veterinarians are sending people. I've had many people come to my door and say, the vet told me to find a local beekeeper because my dog has allergies. So, but as far as the taste, I want to mention this because it's interesting. The honeys, they're all different. Even the honey that I harvest from the same hive from year to year sometimes is different. Now, as a general rule, the honey is pretty light in the first harvest that I harvest, usually in July, and then if I harvest again in the fall, it might be a darker honey. There's different flowers out there, so it changes it. But I always tell the story just to get an idea. One of my yards, I harvested, I had 6 hives, and I harvested the honey, and it all was looking the same. I'm spinning it out, and all of a sudden I had these 2 boxes of honey. I spun it out, and it went from, the nice amber color, and it was like motor oil.
Wow.
And I was so surprised because it came from one hive. One of the, so the bees in one of those hives decided to go to a totally different place for their forage, and as the other bees. And it turned out the honey was delicious, and I didn't have enough of it. People wanted that dark honey. But the bees, and just so, I always get these questions too, like, oh, what should I plant in my yard? And there's so many, bee-friendly plants, but you have to remember too, bees can fly, a few miles in radius. And so all these bees, they're going to probably prefer what they're looking for is a big stand of the same thing so they can make the most out of their trip. So they're going to look for, a big stand of clover or something like that. Sure, they'll forage from what's in your yard, but that's not going to sustain them. They're going to have to go further too. So, certainly plant, bee-friendly forage in your yards and so forth. But they're also going to be going to these big stands, and that's where most of my hives are out, like at the Nature Center in Bolingbrook. They're right out by all that natural forage, and there's a lot of good trees and wildflowers and things like that. So I get a good product from them.
Oh, good. Well, I think you've answered all of my questions, Marge, now. I really appreciate you taking the time coming on the show and educating me and our viewers. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I hope I get to go see one of the hives.
Definitely. You'll have to come out.
And things. Okay, Bolingbrook, you learned a lot about beekeeping. I wonder how many of you are going to try to get a hive going.
Hello, it's Barbara Parker. I'm here at Hidden Oaks with our beekeeper, Marge, and she's going to explain all about keeping the bees in their boxes. No. And she's going to explain all about the bees and their boxes and how to maintain them. Thank
And if everything goes as planned, I will bring a frame of honey, hopefully, if there's one in there, up to show you.
Now you look like a beekeeper. So now we're setting up the smoker so that you could get inside the hive
Yeah, it calms them.
and the bees will be calmed while you're in there, correct?
Yeah, the smoke tends to calm them a bit, so today we'll use some smoke. And then we'll just peek in and see if they're making any honey. These are pine needles. Inexpensive. Burn real nice. Got to get a good smoke going underneath. I smell like the campfire all season.
Like one of those things they used to have by the fireplace to get the smoke
Yeah.
going, the old ones like
Bellows,
that?
yeah. There's a bellows, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Once you get it going successfully, it could stay lit for a long time. Alright, I think that's good. Gloves just in case. We'll see how they are today. I always smoke their entrance down here. Kind of let them know we're coming in. Just a little under there and give it a few seconds to. So the smoke calms them. Sometimes it interferes with their communication abilities. Some people say that they think there's a forest fire, so they start to gorge themselves with honey thinking they're going to have to leave, and then it just keeps them busy while you're in there. So,
Ah, okay.
But either
So whatever
way it
the
works.
reason, it works though.
Either way it works. And then I talk to them. Good morning, bees. Few seconds. This is a nice time of day to go into the hive when it's sunny, and you know a lot of them are out foraging. You know, whereas if it was later in the evening, I'd have a lot of bees in here. So here, I'll give you a close-up look. Some of the bees on the cover. All right, we'll go. We'll see if there's any honey now. nice frame there. Working on capping the honey. As you can see, they could care less I'm in here. Nice and
They're
calm.
busy.
Yeah. So this is kept honey. They've changed the nectar into honey, covered it with wax, and they may be finishing up just a little bit. Now I'll turn this around, and you'll see some uncapped that they haven't gotten to yet.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh yeah, the difference.
So they're still working on that. When it's all capped, then I know that it's all honey. If I take it out of the hive too early, when it's not capped and it's nectar, it would actually ferment in the bottle. So I'm going to be sure that the moisture level is low enough that it's considered honey. So,
And how long from start to finish, like when you put this in, how long does it usually take?
you know, it depends. When there's a heavy nectar flow, they're not in a heavy flow right now, but when there's a heavy nectar flow, they can fill a whole box up in a week. That's in a perfect world. But otherwise, you know, you may leave it on for a month, month and a half, and just see how many boxes you get. It could be anywhere from no boxes of honey to, 4 boxes of honey.
So this plaque right here is called a box. This is a box of honey. That
Well,
you
this
have,
is a frame.
a frame.
Right. So there's
Okay.
10 frames in each box. 9 or 10 frames
Okay.
in each box. And
So when you talk about a box, you're talking about the 10 frames inside
yes,
the box.
yes.
Gotcha.
So one of those boxes on top where I harvest the honey from, if it's completely filled like this, it averages about 35 pounds of honey.
Wow.
So, yeah, but you can see how calm they are. They have a job to do. They could care less that I'm in here, see?
And no gloves.
No, they're good. Yeah, I'll give it some more time, and then I'll be in here probably by next week.
And then you
Harvest
should
the
have enough to harvest. Okay.
Yeah, I've actually harvested here a couple weeks ago, so they've already given us a good supply of honey. All right.
Very good. Well, thank you, Marge. It was so nice of you to let me come here and watch you work with this and see it uphand. It makes a whole lot more sense when you see it in
Sure,
person.
Yeah. So, and anyone can walk up to the fence area and watch the bees. They're pretty intriguing to watch. But thanks for visiting my bee yard, though.
Now, how often do you come and check on the hives?
It depends.
The walkway to the bees.
I would say on average, I'm here every week or 2
Okay.
doing something.
Now, none of the wild little critters that we have ever tried to get in or remove the bricks from the top to get in?
No, I keep the bricks on because, there is a chance that maybe a raccoon might. I've
Yeah.
never had one. There is a critter called the Homo sapien. The only time I've had a problem is I think that, maybe some kids try to stick a branch in and kick the lid off and so forth. But,
None.
other than that, the bricks pretty much keep the animals from,
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you were doing one in your own backyard, you should put something heavy on top to protect it because we have critters too.
Yeah, all the time. And not just the critters. Heavy winds could also lift the cover off. But I should have showed you a little bit closer, but there's something called propolis that the bees, they bring in from the sap of the trees and the plants. Or actually, it's a resin. And they bring it in. It's real gooey and sticky. And any little crack or crevice in the hive, they're
they're putting that
They're like doing a repair
all around.
job to it?
That's why I need this tool, because sometimes I can't even get the lid off or, you know, get one of those boxes off unless I, it's like taffy in the summer. It's real gooey and sticky. In the summer it's brittle, but they'll actually, we call it bee glue because they glue their hive parts together with it. So chances are it's not going to blow apart unless you have a new hive and they haven't had a chance to do that. But, you know, it's always a good idea to keep the bricks on.
Okay. Now, do you always use the smoker when you're going to take the honey out to calm them before you do it?
Actually, that's the time when I normally don't use a smoker.
Oh, okay.
Now, usually there's no other people around, but there's a lot of bees flying around. But I try. Usually, I'll smoke when I'll really smoke when I go down and do inspections into the brood area. But I try not to smoke the honey sippers too much because I don't want them really to taste like smoke. So, you know, today I put a tad in there just so that, you know, just to be sure. But typically, I'll use a smoke for inspections and honey harvesting. I'll just, and again, you saw how you know how good they are. You know,
And I'm standing here and I haven't gotten bit, so.
Yeah. And like I said, certain times of the year they may be on high alert. You know, when there's not much forage out there. There's a lot of critters that want to get in there to get that honey besides the honeybees. You know, bumblebees and wasps. Sometimes I watch them fight them off.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if they overtake a hive, we call it robbing. They can actually do that. So what I'll probably come in next month when there is going to be a dearth. The summer flowers are going to die off, and the fall ones haven't started blooming yet. So they're going to have a lack of forage. What I'll do is I'll put my entrance. It's called an entrance reducer. So it'll cover up this really big entrance to a tiny entrance, so that they don't have as much space to guard. You know, there's guard bees there. They all have different jobs. There's guard bees, but when the nectar's flowing, there's not a big threat because everybody has food. But when when a dearth comes along, then I'm going to cover that up. So that's just another thing. Like as a beekeeper, you have to be aware of, you know, what's going on outside.
Well, like you say, you learn something new each year. So, Bolingbrook, any of you that want to start beekeeping, these are all good little tidbits for you.
But this is where I come to relax. I like to stand in the middle of the bee yard, open up a hive, just to watch them do what they do, and be in the middle of it. It's relaxing to me. So I suggest anyone else just try. It's a fun thing.
Again, thank you so much, Marge. I really appreciate it, and good luck with all your honey collecting.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you found this session as informative on the bee population as I did. And I even got to taste some of the honey. And the honey is absolutely fantastic.